washing and shaving kit. Then I used my call card to dial Metal Mickey from a phone booth on the forecourt. There was no answer from his extension at the embassy, not even voicemail, and the switchboard wouldn't take messages. Baby G told me it was 1836. He must have finished for the day. I tried to remember his home number. I couldn't. Shit. It got binned with the 3C. I returned to the apartment. Sarah was lying on the sofa half asleep, TV on, and with no coffee made. I threw her a sub and a bag of crisps and turned to reheat the water. The yellow freezer light told me it was still working overtime to achieve quick freeze. Sarah eventually reached out and started to pull open her food. I poured water into the coffee mugs. The annoying thing was that everything she'd said made sense. She'd done nothing to show she was lying. Why should she trust anyone back in London? I knew from first-hand experience that the firm were as slippery as eels in baby oil. I turned round to face her as I placed the coffee on the breakfast bar. She was lying back with a sub on her chest, one mouthful missing. She'd closed down. I knew how she felt. I was knackered and my head was starting to spin. I desperately needed sleep. I checked that the front door was locked and crashed out on one of the double beds, on top of the piles of sheets, towels and blankets. It was still dark when I woke. I turned and felt another body next to me. I hadn't heard or felt her come into the room. As my eyes adjusted to the dull light from the street lamps through the blind, I could make out her shape. She was facing me, curled up, her hands together, supporting her head. It sounded as if she was having a bad dream. She mumbled to herself and started to move her head against the folded blanket. She'd never appeared more vulnerable. I just lay there, looking at her. Her skin glowed in the warmth of the room, but her brow was furrowed. For a moment she almost seemed to be in pain. I reached out to touch her, just as she gave a small cry, tossed, and turned once, then settled again. I could still smell the scent of apple shampoo in her hair. I figured I'd been pretty good at keeping people at arm's length ever since I was a kid. It didn't make life completely fucking brilliant, but it kept me going, and it sure as hell helped avoid disappointment. This was different, though. Very different. She murmured again and snuggled closer to me. I didn't know how to deal with this at all. First Kelly, now Sarah. Any minute now I'd be checking out estate agents' particulars for the dream cottage with roses round the door. The full catastrophe. It scared the shit out of me. I'd never been the world's best when it came to staying in one place, and I started to have this uncomfortable feeling that keeping on the move suited me so well because it meant I didn't have to think too much about what I was running away from, or what I was heading towards. I could hear the TV still going in the next room. A woman was trying to sell us a great deal on a barbecue set. I rolled over, sat up, and pulled at the corner of the blind. It wasn't raining, but I could see from the rivulets on the windows that we'd had another downpour during the last few hours. The backlighter of Baby G told me it was 02:54. I stood up slowly, trying not to disturb her, and made my way towards the kitchen. Rubbing my eyes back into life as I passed the mirror on the living room wall, I saw the face from hell. Creases and blotches from sleeping on the towels, and my hair thick with grease, sticking up as if I'd had a good burst from a taser. I shuffled to the kitchen, scratching every fold of skin I could reach. It was coffee time. Sarah must have heard me banging about. Her voice behind me matched the way I felt and looked. "I'd like one of those, please." The TV went quiet as she hit off on the remote. She sat on the sofa looking sheepishly at the carpet, her arms between her legs, as if she'd been unmasked as human after all. I was expecting her to say, "Please don't tell anyone." But she didn't. Instead, she said, "I'm sorry about that, Nick. I just felt so alone and scared. I needed to be close to you." She looked up at me. Her eyes were full of pain, and something else I couldn't quite identify, but found myself hoping was regret. "You did mean a lot to me, Nick. I just didn't know how to deal with it at the time. I'm sorry for how I behaved then. And I'm sorry for being so stupid now." She paused, searching my face. "I won't do it again, I promise." I turned back to the coffee and tried to sound upbeat. "That's okay? No drama?" What I really wanted to do was grab her, hold her tightly, and pretend for a moment that I could make everything all right. But I was frozen between my memory of what she'd done to me in the past and what my orders were for the future. I plugged in the kettle, feeling more and more confused. I had a crack at dragging myself back to the present. "I need Michael Warner's home number." It didn't register with her at first. "Who?" "Michael Warner. I want his home number." I turned and glanced at her. It dawned on her that I'd been to Washington. She said, "What did you tell them?" I didn't think I'd ever seen her look more miserable. "That I was reviewing your PV. Anyway, I've only talked to Metal Mickey." I tipped last night's mugs into the sink and started again. "Metal Mickey?" She started to laugh. "Great name." Then her mood changed again. "Why do you need his number?" I brought the coffee over to her, placing it on the low table in front of the sofa. I had some questions I wanted him to research. He might think it odd if I don't call to get the answers. She thought for a while as she took her first sip, and then recited the number. I didn't have a pen, but scratched it onto the front of the phone book with my car key and ripped the piece off. "I'll be back in a minute." She put down a brew and stood up. "It's a bit early, isn't it?" She was right, but I wanted to know. "Fuck him. He's paid 24 hours a day, isn't he?" The call boxes by the pool and courts were only about 50 metres away across the road. To the right of them were the newspaper vending machines, one with USA Today and the other with the Fayetteville Observer-Times. Under the street lighting I could just make out a picture of the forest on the front page of the Times. I couldn't be asked to find out what they were saying. It really had been raining while we were asleep, and quite heavily judging by the size of the puddles. It was warm and damp, and my sweatshirt was starting to stick to my back. I wished this weather would make up its mind. I got out my bit of phone book and the call card and dialed. There was a sleepy, "Hello?" from Metal Mickey, very drowsy, but slow and wary. "It's me, Nick. Sorry it's so early, but I couldn't get to a phone. Have you had any luck?" I heard the rustling of bedclothes as he got comfortable with the phone in his ear. "Oh, yes. Let me get my eyes on, and I'm all yours." There was a gap as he fumbled around for his glasses. I didn't want to be on the phone to him all night. "Our two friends we spoke about. What are they up to for the rest of this week?" I turned round to check if anyone was watching. Not that it would be unusual to be out telephoning at this hour, as these apartments didn't come with a phone. You had to connect your own. "Well, they've finished their work and will spend Wednesday and a bit of Thursday just pressing flesh and having photo opportunities to show how nice they are and how well things have gone during their visit. Isn't that nice?" "I'm sure it is. But where? Where is all this happening?" "Don't really know. In and around DC, I suppose." "Okay, mate. Now what about our American friend?" Now, I think we need to meet for that one, Nick. I don't really want to discuss him on a landline. And a lot of paperwork has come my way that I think you may want to read. I also have the information you wanted about your other friend. Had he found something sensitive? Or was he just worried that when his PV review came up, gobbing off on the phone would reflect badly on him? I said, "Okay, mate, I'll tell you what. Same place as before, at 12:30 p.m. today. You sponsor it." "Lovely. I'll see you then." There was a pause. "But what about the others?" He was sounding more like the village gossip with every word. "What?" "About your other 4 friends. You know, the ones who go on holidays to the lakes." "Oh, yes, those friends. I'd forgotten. I have so many." "I know just what you mean, Nick. It's so hard to keep track." He paused again. I was going to have to work for this. "Who are they?" "Can't tell you. Well, not over the phone, Nick. I think you need to read what I have for you. It all links in very nicely with Girly. It's like a great big jigsaw puzzle. Isn't it exciting? See you tomorrow." "Remember, you sponsor." I had to cut in to make sure he knew. "Bye." I didn't know if he'd understood what I meant, but I'd find out soon enough. I replaced the receiver and turned to walk back to the apartment. Sarah was halfway across the car park and storming towards me. I stayed where I was and let her come to me. She was shaking with anger. "Are you going to kill me?" She jabbed my chest with every word. "Is that what the phone call's all about?" "Don't be stupid," I said. "Why would I drag you all the way here?" "I saw the freezer light, Nick. Don't lie to me." "What? It must have come on when I turned on the fridge." "Bullshit. They're on separate plugs. Do I look stupid? You're lying to me, Nick." I looked around to make sure no one was watching. This wasn't exactly Times Square, and raised voices on the street in the early hours of the morning were sure to bring police or private security cars. I put my finger to my lips. She lowered her tone, but still laid into me. "Why don't you believe me, for Christ's sake? Why don't you believe what I'm trying to tell you?" Her throat tightened, and tears welled up in her eyes. It was the first time I'd ever seen her cry. "I can't believe you were going to do that. I thought I meant something to you." I discovered I was feeling guilty, probably as guilty as I ever had. "What after you froze me, Nick? Was it the wood shredder to grind me up, like you did with those 2 in Afghanistan? Bag me up, then down to the river and feed the fish? They ordered a T-104, didn't they? Didn't they?" I shook my head slowly. "You're wrong, Sarah. You are—" She wasn't having any of it. "You were going to do the same to me as you did to those 2 mudge, weren't you? Weren't you, Nick?" I held her by the shoulders. "You're talking shit. The freezer must have been on already. Listen to me, I believe you, I really do. But it changes nothing. I am still going to take you back to London." The words were said with conviction. I wasn't lying about either of those things now. It made it easier as I looked into her eyes. "But Nick, if you believe me, you've got to help me. You're the only one I can trust." She shook her head and turned her back on me. "Ha! What a fucking irony!" "Sarah, listen. I don't care what happens in Washington. The only thing I do care about is getting out of here with both of us alive." She turned back to me, tears streaming down her face, then wrapped both arms around my waist and buried her head in my chest. She started to cry even harder. I wanted to do something, but just didn't know what. I looked up at the clouds and let her get on with it. The crying switched back to anger, and she pushed me away. "You used to care for me, Nick. Haven't you any fucking boundaries?" She covered her face with her hands, wiping away the tears. "I can't believe you were going to kill me, or even think of it." "No, Sarah, no, I wasn't." The crying changed to convulsive sobs. It sounded as if she was having a breakdown. "I got it so wrong, Nick. So fucking wrong. I thought I had it all worked out, all under control. I even trusted you. How could I have been so stupid?" I stroked her cheek, wordlessly, then ran my fingers through her hair as she carried on. "You were right. You were right. I wanted to be the one. I wanted to do it all myself. I wanted it so badly, it just got out of control. Once it started, I couldn't go anywhere for help. I had to go it alone." She squeezed me hard and carried on sobbing. "What am I going to do, Nick? Or maybe you don't care." It was pointless asking me. I was still trying to get over my guilt. Fucking hell. I'd got so far down the line that I'd switched the freezer on. How could I have done that to her? Maybe I didn't have moral boundaries like normal people. Was I always going to be the freak without emotion? She was still in remorse overload. It was as if she was talking to herself. "I could have done something about it in the beginning. But no, I wanted to be the one to get the credit. I'm so sorry. So sorry. Oh, shit, what have I done, Nick?" She squeezed her arms around me even more, desperately wanting support. I put my arms around her and she sobbed her heart out. I wanted to give her the comfort she needed, but just didn't have the tools. I never really needed them. "I don't know what to do, Sarah," I whispered. "Just hold me, Nick. Just hold me." I hugged her tighter. I felt strangely good about what I was doing. We stood there for minutes, rocking gently in each other's arms, her sobs slowly subsiding. I doubted there were any more tears left for her to cry. She wiped her face on my shirt. I tried to lift her chin, but she resisted. "I'm sorry, Nick. I'm just so sorry." She moved away from me and wiped her face with her palms, the sniffles starting to slow down in frequency as she regained some of her composure. "Sarah, where are they going to make the hit?" She looked up, breathless. "The White House. Tomorrow." "How? How will they do it?" I needed to know for when I called London. It would be my justification for returning with her alive. She was in the shit, I understood that. But so would I be if I helped her and hadn't prepared my tuppence worth for the inquiry that was bound to follow. She sniffed loudly. "There's a photo call on the White House lawn with Clinton, Arafat and Netanyahu. They'll give a press conference, then there'll be a ceremony with white doves and songs for peace, kids singing, all that sort of nonsense for the cameras. I don't know any more. The two that were arriving yesterday from Washington had all the details. The team works in just the same way as we do. No details until the last minute. All we knew was that we were already accredited to enter the White House as news crew." "So that's why the old guy had a suit?" She nodded. "We were going to be part of Monica Beach." "Oh shit, Nick. How did I ever think I could do this on my own?" Monica Beach was what the media called the area of the White House that TV crews gave their reports from. Because ever since the Lewinsky affair, it had been even more crowded than Santa Monica Beach. My first reaction was that it sounded more like something out of a B-movie than a real plan. It wouldn't work. They'd never get out of there. The tears started again. "Nick, these people don't care. Survival isn't an issue. Look who they have for their inspiration. Bin Laden's devoted his life to driving the Russians out of Afghanistan, and is now doing the same to drive the Americans from Saudi. He both finances and inspires them. Pakistani, Palestinian, even Americans. Dying is not an issue with these people, you know that. I found myself nodding. If you can't attack your enemy, you attack the friend of your enemy. And what better way to show the world that even the mighty USA can't protect anyone from Allah's vengeance, even in its own backyard? As I spoke, I realized what a fucking idiot I'd been. Just keeping my head down, concentrating on the job, trying not to think about where all this was heading. Shit, Sarah. Explain to me in detail. The kids singing and White Dove's bit. I could see her scrolling through her memory for the information. She took a breath and wiped her nose as she gathered her thoughts. After a press conference, there's going to be a ceremony involving about 200 kids. They'll present a peace blanket made from patches sewn in the US, Israel and Palestine to the 3 leaders on the White House lawn, in front of the North Portico. The kids will sing songs of peace, and white doves will be released as Netanyahu, Arafat and Clinton hold the blanket for the cameras. Now I knew what had been troubling me. My heart started pounding and I thought I was going to vomit. I sounded surprisingly calm for someone whose mind was working at warp speed. My friend's kids are going to be there. There was a look of horror on her face. Oh shit. Nick, one of the options was a bombing. It wasn't their first choice, but now who knows? Without the assault weapons, it will be the easiest way. She started to cry again. I grabbed her and forced her to look me in the face. Her eyes were puffed up, her cheeks wet and red. Sarah, I've got to make a call. She started to beg. Please don't, Nick. Calling won't solve it. Your friend's children might be saved, but the others will still die. I put my hand up to her mouth. I understood what she was saying. I couldn't call Josh anyway. He would only get back just in time for the final rehearsal. Did I give a fuck about the other kids? Yes, of course I did. Just not as much as I did about Josh's. I have to call someone to get his number, that's all. I strode back to the bank of phones, got the phone card out and dialed. Miss Grenfell Brodie answered. I said, Hello, it's Nick Stone again. I'm very sorry to bother you, but would it be possible to talk to Kelly? I'll phone back in 15 minutes, if that's all right. She was obviously getting used to this. I could almost hear her sigh. Yes, of course. But please try not to do this too much, Mr. Stone. It disrupts her routine. Phone calls can be arranged through this office at a more convenient time for everyone concerned. Thank you for telling me. I wasn't aware of that. It won't happen again, I promise. Could you ask her to bring her address book with her? Yes, of course. She will be brushing her teeth. She's just had breakfast. I will fetch her. Thank you. I put the phone down. I did know about booking calls. But then again, fuck 'em. Who was paying the bills? Sarah arched an eyebrow. Who is Kelly? Never mind. We stood there waiting. I could see that she was dying to say something more, but she knew me well enough to know I wasn't in the mood to answer. As I stood by the phones, more and more anxious about being seen, I realized that I no longer had to be. I could call Kelly from the mobile. We walked back towards the apartment in silence, Sarah still with her arm around my waist. As I closed the door behind us, she went to wash her face. I put the kettle on. I thought about what Sarah had said. I didn't normally remember the deaths I'd seen, but I could see the body of Kelly's little sister as clearly as if she'd been slaughtered yesterday. Whatever happened, Josh's kids weren't going to go the same way. But should I tell him, and risk him doing his job and telling the Secret Service? I would in his shoes, but did it even matter? Would the ceremony go on if he did? Yes, of course it would. But what about the source? Would it affect the timing of the hit? As the kettle did its stuff, I bent down to pull the deep freeze plug from its socket, then stopped myself. Things had changed, but pulling it would show her that she'd been right about me. I decided to leave it where it was. I walked around the breakfast bar towards the sofa. What the fuck was I going to do about this situation? My first reaction was to tell Josh and get him not to tell a soul. But that wasn't going to work. Even if, like me, he didn't give a shit about the brass in the White House, he would about the kids. Then he'd be smack in the middle of the same predicament as me. Some of them must be his friends' kids, and then friends of his friends. Soon every fucker would know the score. Sarah came from the bedroom, her eyes still red, even after her wash-up. She saw the steam rising from the kettle and walked past me to make the brews. I checked my watch. A different female voice answered this time. "Oh, yes, she's on her way. She should be here any moment." "Thank you." I cradled the phone in my shoulder, expecting a wait, but almost at once got, "Hi. Why are you calling me again? What's up?" At first I thought I should try not to sound as if I was talking to a child. Then I decided not to bother. "Nothing. Just checking you've cleaned your teeth." It got a laugh out of her. "Have you got your address book with you?" "Sure have." "All right then. I'm after Josh's number, because I'm going to the airport in a minute. Guess what? I'm going to Washington and maybe I'll get to see him." "Cool." "I know. But I need the phone number and I've left it at home." "Oh, okay." I could hear the pages flicking in her Spice Girls address book. At the bottom of each page was a multiple-choice profile and a space to insert the cool factor of the person the page was about. I'd felt quite proud to see that she'd circled funny and weird as my description, and given me a CF of 8 out of 10. But that had all crashed before my eyes as I turned to the next page and saw her grandparents circled as kind and gentle, and given a CF of 10. Perhaps I'd have to start tucking her pullovers into her jeans all the time if I wanted to up my cred. She reeled off the number, and I scratched it on the piece of phone book, then tapped it into the phone as we talked. "Nick, why are you going to America?" "I'm going with a friend. Her name is Sarah." I looked over at her. She was staring quizzically, trying to work it out. I was sure she knew it was a child. Those things are hard to hide. I said, "My friend Sarah is going to do some work in Washington, and I'm going with her. Hey, would you like to speak to her?" "Okay." There was a slight reluctance in her voice. Maybe she sensed that things were about to get complicated. I didn't want to tell her they already were. Sarah came to the settee with 2 full coffee mugs. I passed over the phone and said, "Sarah, this is Kelly. Kelly wants to say hello." She fixed her eyes on me as she spoke. "Hello?" There was a gap. Then, "Yes, that's right, Sarah." I kept looking at her and hoped this was the right thing to do. It might come in handy later. Sarah was still talking. "Yes, I'm going to Washington." "What do I do?" "I'm a lawyer." "Yes, I'm just going over to work, just for a few days, and Nick is coming with me." She was obviously getting the 3rd degree. "Oh, yes, a long time, but I hadn't seen him for years." "Yes, okay. I'll pass him back. Nice to talk to you, Kelly. Goodbye." "Will you still call me next week?" "I promise. Don't worry, this isn't instead of next week's phone call. I'll see you soon, no worries." I was just about to carry out our normal routine at the end of a call, but checked myself. This one was different. Shit, This could be the last time I spoke to her. "Hey, Kelly." "What?" "I love you." She sounded slightly quizzed at me saying it first, but very happy nonetheless. "I love you too." "Bye-bye." I slowly took the phone away from my ear and switched it off, not feeling too sure how I felt about letting it all hang out. "How old is she?" 9 last week. "You kept that quiet, didn't you?" "She's a friend's child." "Of course." "No, she is." I thought about telling her about Kev and Marcia, but decided against it. She sat next to me on the sofa and cupped both hands around her coffee, still puffy-eyed. "You okay?" She nodded, trying to regain some sort of composure. "Yes. Look, thanks for... I don't know what came over me." As we drank our coffee, I explained my plan. We would go to DC, and I would look at what Metal Mickey thought was so worth looking at. Depending on what I found, I would then decide whether to tell Josh or just go for it ourselves. I was feeling uncomfortable about the Josh situation, but cut away by trying to justify it to myself by the fact that he wouldn't be back until early this afternoon. And by then, I'd be with Mickey. So it wasn't as if I was abusing our friendship. I took another sip and decided that was bollocks. Deep down, I knew I was. Everything we did now would be paid for and ordered by Sarah, in the name of Sarah Darnley. It was part of her security blanket. There must not be any movement detected on my credit card or phone. We went back down to the call box and called the ticket line. We were going to leave for Washington National on the 8:50 a.m. from Raleigh. After showering and sorting our shit out, we drove north, back towards Raleigh. There was a constant flow of early morning commuter traffic. It was cloudy, but no need for wipers yet. First lights had passed us by as we headed out of the city, stopping only to buy some coffee and a plain blue baseball cap for Sarah from a gas station. I had one hand on the wheel and was sipping coffee through the gap in the top of the container when Sarah, who'd been keeping one eye on her wing mirror, turned off the radio. "Nick, we have a problem." Behind us and to our right was a Fayetteville blue and white. I stopped at the lights as Sarah started to draw her pistol, placing it under her right thigh. On the basis of her performance so far, the mere sight of it got me flapping. "Sarah, let me do this." She didn't reply. The cruiser came up level. My heart started to pound big time. Both of the patrolmen, one black, the other Hispanic, were wearing black, short-sleeved shirts and sunglasses, even at this time of the morning. Their chests looked bigger than they actually were, due to the protection they wore under their shirts. The driver was staring at us both. The Hispanic was face down, looking at a screen attached to the dash, probably carrying out a plate check on our car. I smiled like an idiot at the driver. What was I supposed to do? He wasn't giving me any instructions. It was Sarah who switched on. She opened her window and, at the same time, I could see the black trooper doing the same. His moustache met his glasses, with acne-scarred cheeks each side. I couldn't see his eyes, only what he was looking at in his mirrored lenses, but his demeanour told me that I wasn't on his Christmas card list. Sarah came to the rescue. "Hello, officer. Can I help you? Is there something wrong?" Her voice was outrageous. It was the fluffiest damsel-in-distress impression I'd ever heard. The policeman would have heard it many times before, only not in Cambridge English. He drawled, "Yes, ma'am. The driver of this vehicle is violating the Federal Highway Code by consuming a beverage whilst at the controls of a moving vehicle." She said breathily, "I'm so sorry, officer. We didn't realize. We're just on vacation from England and—" The black policeman got the okay from his mate. The check had come through. He nodded back at him, then turned towards us. He looked at me and jutted his jaw. "Sir?" The lights had changed to green, but no one was going to hit their horn. I smiled like the dickhead tourist I was determined to be. "Yes?" "Sir, please don't consume beverages on the highway. It's an offense." "I'm sorry, officer, it won't happen again." Trying hard not to let a smile reach his face, he drawled, "Y'all have a nice day." And they drove off. At the airport, I abandoned the car in the long-term car park. Formalities such as handing it back to the rental company didn't figure on my list of things to do today. I waited outside the terminal while Sarah went in and got the tickets. I needed to call Josh's number, hoping to leave a message. Getting it clear in my head what I wanted to say, I hit the keypad. A heavily Hispanic female voice answered. "Hello? Hello? Oh, hi, is this Josh's number?" "Jish?" "Yes, can I leave a message for him?" "No, Jish." "Can I leave a message?" "Jish not here." "I know that, I want to leave a message." "I say to Jish, goodbye." The phone went dead. I felt as if I'd wandered into Faulty Towers. I redialed as Sarah came out of the terminal. She saw me and headed over. She passed, handed me my ticket and carried on walking. We were going to travel as two separate individuals. "Hello? Hello?" I could hear a vacuum cleaner in the background. I said, "Please say to Jish, Nick is flying to Washington today." "Okay. Is Nick?" We were getting warmer. "What time is he home?" "He no home." Maybe not so warm. "Muy bien. Muchas gracias, señorita," I said, using rusty stuff I'd learned while garrisoned on Gibraltar as a young squaddie. Then I added the only other Spanish phrase I knew. "Hasta la vista, baby." I checked in and made my way to the gate area. The front pages of the state newspapers glared at me as I passed the newsstand. The main picture seemed to be a fuzzy black and white still from a CCTV video of Sarah and me lifting the van. She was still looking like a sperm, T-shirt over her head. I was side on with my head uncovered. It must have been taken at the point when the dog and I were about to have a major disagreement. I decided not to buy the paper or hang around. The newsstand was part of the shop where I'd bought the maps of the lakes. Maybe it would be the same woman behind the counter, and she could put two and two together. I walked to the gate area and waited. Chapter 24. The hour-long flight was late landing. The Ronald Reagan National Airport, Washington's main domestic terminal, is a stone's throw from the capital, on the west bank of the Potomac River and southwest of D.C., near the Pentagon. You can see the traffic jams around Capitol Hill as you land. I disembarked behind Sarah, who was following the rest of the herd towards the baggage area. We'd both packed our weapons in our bags. Being a domestic flight, there wasn't much of a risk. I collected my holdall from the carousel and walked off to the phones. It was 10:27 a.m. My Mexican friend was quick to answer. "No, Jish," she said. "Más tarde. He home 2:00. Then she put the phone down. Getting anywhere in D.C. by taxi at this time of day is a wish. If you're in a hurry, the best bet is the metro. As I headed towards the airport station, Sarah linked up with me with her head down, baseball cap on. At the machines, I checked the map and put in 2 $1 bills for my ticket. "RV back here, by the machines at 2:00. She shook her head. "No, not here. I'll meet you somewhere in town. There's more chance of me being seen here." It was clear by the way she studied the instruction panel that, in all the time she'd lived in this city, She'd never used the metro. I took the change out of the cup with my ticket and put in some more money for her as she looked at the map. "I need to keep out of town for now," she said. "No need to expose myself too much. I'll go south and hold off for a while." "Do you know the Barnes & Noble on M? In Georgetown?" Still studying the map, she nodded. 2:00. As we moved towards the barriers, I checked the signs and pointed her to her platform. "See you at 2. The peak of her cap nodded and headed down the escalators. The rules of the Washington Metro are simple. The answer to everything is no. No smoking, no eating, no Walkmans, litter or pets. If you're good, boys and girls, you can read the newspaper. The station was as stark and clean as the set of a sci-fi film, with its streamlined, dark grey concrete and moody lighting. The lights set into the platform flooring started to flash, warning that a train was about to arrive. Moments later, a string of sleek silver carriages whispered alongside, and the doors opened silently. I was heading north on the Blue Line. It would take me past the Pentagon, which has its own metro station, and the Arlington National Cemetery, then eastwards under the Potomac to Foggy Bottom, the nearest stop for Georgetown and the M and 23rd Street junction. I came out of the metro and onto the busy street, feeling cleaner than when I'd gone in. Checking the map on the wall at the station entrance, I saw that I had just over a 10-minute walk to the RV. As I headed north, I noticed the improvement in the weather. Only 50% cloud cover and no rain. Compared with the downpours of the last couple of days, it was heaven. Bread and chocolate on 23rd was teeming with office workers enjoying a lunchtime sandwich and coffee. I had just crossed M and was on the opposite side of the road, walking towards Sarah's apartment. Metal Mickey seemed a bit of an airhead, and I didn't want to get fucked over and lifted while tucking into a sticky bun and cappuccino. I didn't expect the RV to go wrong, but these things have to be done right. Complacency is a tried and tested shortcut to a disability pension, or worse. Anyone could have been listening to his calls, or he might simply have got cold feet and decided to seek advice. They would then use him to get to me, the K who should have been in North Carolina dealing with Sarah. I bumbled on, not looking directly through the window, but checking things out all the same. If a trigger was on the shop and a weirdo walked past staring at the place, it would be a good bet that he was the target. Things were looking fine. I couldn't see anyone sitting in cars or hanging about, but that wasn't necessarily significant. Whether or not I was getting set up by Metal Mickey, they could just as easily have put a trigger on him. And if he'd said anything to the firm, I'd know as soon as I met him. I didn't have him down as the sort of man who could tell lies with his body language. I walked past the 7-Eleven type store on my right and noticed it had a small coffee and Danish area, busily taking its share of the office workers' dollars. There wasn't much going on in there either, just people filling their faces and catching up on gossip. I got to the junction and turned left on N. Walking about another 30 metres, I was more or less level with the entrance to Sarah's block. The water system was working overtime again on the flower garden. If I'd been triggered as I did my walk past, they would now be behind me, thinking that I was heading for the apartment. 2 attractive black women were approaching from the opposite direction, coffee and pretzels in their hands. I would have no more than 3 seconds in which to check. They passed, laughing and talking loudly. Now was the time. I turned to give them an admiring glance in that way that men think they do so unobtrusively. The 2 women gave me a "you should be so lucky, white boy" look, and got back to their laughing. There were 3 candidates beyond them. A middle-aged couple dressed for the office turned the corner, coming from the same direction as me. But they looked more preoccupied in staring into each other's eyes for as long as possible before it was time to go home to their wife or husband. Then again, good operators would always make it look that way. The other possible was coming from straight ahead, on N Street, on the same side as Sarah's apartment. He was wearing blue jeans and a short-sleeved dark green shirt with the tail hanging out, the way I would if I wanted to cover my weapon and radio. I faced back the way I was walking. You can only do so much checking. If these were operators, the couple would now be overtly cooing to each other. But instead of sweet nothings, they'd be reporting on what I was getting up to, on a radio net, telling Control and the other operators where I was, what I was wearing, the colour of my bag and which shoulder it was being carried on. And if they were good, they would also report that I could be aware because of the look back. I carried on the last 20 metres to the end of the block and turned left. I was now on 24th Street and paralleling 23rd. This was the second corner I had turned. If there was a technical device or trigger on our RV, there could be people stood off around the other side of the block, waiting for the word to move. Nothing seemed to look that way. Just lots of traffic and people lining up to buy lunch at the pretzel stalls. The couple were still with me. Maybe they wanted pretzels, or maybe they'd told Greenshirt that they could take the target around the corner towards M Street. Stopping at the last of the 3 stalls, I bought a Coke and watched the area I'd just come from. The lovers were now at the middle stall doing the same. I moved off, got to M and turned left back towards 23rd and the RV. 3 corners had now been turned in a circular route, an unnatural thing to do. I moved into an office doorway and opened my Coke. If the lovers came past, I would bin the RV. But then again, any good operator wouldn't turn the 3rd corner. I hated clearing an area, especially if it was me going into the RV. It was so hard to be sure. Nothing happened during the 5 minutes it took me to finish the can, so now seemed the ideal time to get my weapon out of the bag. Apart from anything else, fishing around like a tourist looking for a map gave me an excuse to be standing there now that I'd finished drinking. I sneaked together the Chinese thing and its mag, which I'd split for the flight, and tucked it into my jeans, ensuring that the jacket covered it and the catch was off, so it could be used in the semi-auto mode. Moving off again, I eventually turned back onto 23rd and into the 7-Eleven. I bought a Danish, a newspaper and the biggest available cup of coffee, and sat at a table that gave me a good trigger on the RV. There were 25 minutes to go. I watched as people walked past from both directions, on both sides of the street. Were they doing walk-pasts to see if we were in there? This wasn't paranoia, it was attention to detail. It doesn't work like it does in the movies, with fat policemen sitting in their car right outside the target, engine running, moaning about their wives and eating donuts. No one went in and came straight out again. No one walked around muttering into their collar. All of which meant either they weren't there, or they were very good indeed. Cars, trucks and taxis trundled past from right to left on the one-way system. As the traffic stopped for a red at the junction with M, I pinged Metal Mickey sitting in the back of a cab, well down in his seat with his head resting on the back. I couldn't see his eyes, but I hoped that he was also taking the trouble to clear his route. Maybe he wasn't as much of a numbnut as I'd thought. The traffic moved on, and he went with it. If there was one thing I hated more than clearing an area before a meet, it was the meet itself. It's at simple events like this that people get killed. In the way that a traffic cop stopping a car for jumping a red light might land up getting shot by the driver. I sat, watched, and waited. It wouldn't look abnormal to the staff or anyone else for me to be spending that amount of time there. The place was packed and the size of the coffee signaled that I wasn't a man in a hurry. I checked around me again, just to be sure that I wasn't sitting next to a trigger. It had happened to me once, outside Derry. It was late at night, and I was waiting in a car, waiting to lift a player, only to discover as a JCB tried to crush the car and me with its bucket that I was parked in front of his brother's house. Maybe they'd always done that with any dickhead they spotted picking his nose outside. Mickey appeared right on time, but not from the direction I was expecting him to. He came from the right, the same direction from which he'd approached in the cab. He was dressed in the same loud suit and neon shirt as before. Perhaps he thought I'd have problems IDing him. He was carrying a laptop bag with a strap over his right shoulder. Was what he wanted me to see on hard disk, and the dickhead had actually brought it with him? Maybe he wasn't so switched on. I knew from our last meet that he was right-handed, and noted that his jacket was done up. Chances were he wasn't carrying. Not that it meant that much at this stage, but these things needed to be thought about in case things went tits up. Having cleared his route, he showed no hesitation about going into the cafe. Good man. He did understand about sponsoring the meet. He knew I'd be watching him and covering his arse as well as mine. I watched for another 5 minutes past the RV time. If I didn't walk over to meet him, he would wait another 25 minutes before leaving, then try again tomorrow at the same time. Nothing that I could see told me the RV was compromised. I got off my stool and binned the rest of the coffee, and Danish, checking that my weapon wasn't about to clatter onto the floor. I hated not having an internal holster. I'd already lost my weapon twice because of it. I walked outside and checked once more as I crossed the road. Nothing. Fuck it. There's only so much checking you can do. As I pulled the door towards me, I saw his back in line at the counter. The place was still packed. I walked past him and did my surprised, "Hi, what are you doing here?" He turned and smiled that happy, I haven't seen you for a while look, and we shook hands. "Great to see you. It's been ages." He beamed. "Join me for a coffee and something sinful?" I took a look around. All the seats were taken. "Tell you what," I said, "the place across the street isn't so full. Let's go there." His smile got even bigger as he agreed. When we got out onto the street, he slapped me on the shoulder. "I'm so glad you said that. It's like that every lunchtime, you know. I don't know why I bother going there." To my surprise, he didn't make as if to cross the street, starting instead to walk towards N. I fell into step beside him and shot him a quizzical look. Mickey put his arm around my shoulder and said, "We'll go to Sarah's. It's a bit more private." He patted his computer bag. "I've even brought some milk to go with the Earl Grey. Do you know, there's a little shop in Georgetown that gets it straight from Sir Thomas Lipton himself." He was very pleased with himself. Maybe he was hoping I'd take special note of his initiative when I filed my report. Fuck the milk. I wanted to see what was next to it. As we walked along 23rd, I carried on playing the part of best mate in nice-to-see-you mode. I couldn't decide whether he was really good or away with the fairies. Either way, I was glad I could run faster than him, and had a weapon. "I'll leave the clearing to you now," he said. "You're probably much better at it than I am." I laughed and nodded in response, so that anyone watching would assume he'd just made a joke. "By the way," he grinned, "the man sitting on the corner. He's always around here. He works in the apartments. I know you'll be keeping an eye on him." I looked round and saw Greenshirt sitting on the wall to the right of Sarah's apartment, smoking. "Just in case you started to worry, you may have seen him on your area clearing. I certainly did on my drive past. In fact, I always look out for him. It makes me feel better to know he's there." He gave me a cherubic smile. We reached the entrance and the water system was still drowning the flowers. Wayne was behind the desk, leaning back in his chair and reading a newspaper. It was like watching an action replay, They both had the same clothes on, and even the dialogue was the same. "Hello, Wayne. How are you today?" Wayne put down his paper and grinned like an idiot. He was obviously having a really good day again. "I'm very good. And how are you today?" "I'm just Jim Dandy." The corners of Mickey's mouth were almost touching his ears. As we walked towards him, Wayne turned his full attention to me. I really felt as if I was being welcomed to the asylum. "How are you today? Do you still need that car space? If you want it, you got it." I said, "I'll certainly bear it in mind, thanks." He put his hand up. "Hey, no problem." We reached the desk and Metal Mickey switched his camp game show host's voice into overdrive. "Wayne, I bet if you looked in the delivery drawer, you'd find a large UPS envelope addressed to Sarah." Wayne had a look, rummaged around for a moment and handed it over. "Why, thank you, Wayne. I hope you continue to have a very nice day." We said our goodbyes and walked to the elevator. He saw me looking at the envelope. As the elevator doors closed, he raised an eyebrow. "Why, Mr. Snell, you didn't expect me to carry the material around with me, did you?" Sarah's apartment was just as I'd left it. There was even the faint aroma of burned food hanging in the air. Metal Mickey wrinkled his nose. "Cooking the other night," I explained, closing the door behind us. "Oof, that's what it is." He walked towards the kitchen. "I'd ask for the recipe, but—" He twitched his nose again. "Can I get you some tea?" He threw the envelope onto the settee and unzipped his bag. I walked over and sat down beside it, checking my watch. The envelope looked quite thick, but I had plenty of time before my RV with Sarah. I heard the kettle being filled as I ripped open the UPS plastic outer. Inside was a brown A3 envelope, sealed with sellotape. Metal Mickey came back into the room. "They're printouts, and they are now your responsibility." He couldn't help looking rather pleased with himself. "How did you get all this?" I asked. He gave an impish smile and his eyes twinkled. "Ask no questions, you'll be told no lies. That's what my dear mother always used to say." He came over and sat down next to me. "However, I have a friend," his fingers mimed quote marks, "who has access to Interlink." He clasped his hands together between his legs and did a pretty good impression of a Cheshire cat. It was the most pleased I'd seen him, and he had every reason to be. Interlink was switched on in 1994. The need for real-time intelligence had never been so acute, as the Gulf War demonstrated when General